So earlier there was a question about cessations of the meridian system, and I think the question was that how does it feel like, or how do you recognize it? Well, I'll speak from my own perspective and then give some clues or some pointers to people who might have less or lot less experience of meditation, meaning experience of energetical sensitivity that I have spoken about extensively on this retreat. So, um, when I've had brief cessations since I was a little child, brief cessations, which felt like being hit by a lightning, but you know it only after the lightning has struck you. So you're not aware of it as the lightning strikes, but you only become aware of that something happened, something like a shock happened a second ago. This is exactly how I've heard other practitioners of different traditions describe those initial, very brief cessations, that you become aware of it after it has already passed. So I used to have those thousands of times since I was a small child until to my 20s, few times a week, roughly. And well, I didn't know what it was, and I was really. There was a period when it had happened many times, and I was a bit worried about it. Like, am I going crazy? What is happening to me? I had no understanding whatsoever what these shocks were. But then that fear, that concern passed, and I noticed that there was like some effect afterwards. Having said that, in terms of awakenings, Bhumi events, there was no effect. So I didn't have awakening, a lasting, permanent, anything, just a momentary hit. And I think this is because of my past life karma, being a practitioner in many past lives, so I just had those cessations. This is actually something that I don't think I've ever really asked anybody if other people have those, but that would be a good discussion to have, if practitioners especially have had the same experience. You know, not being a practitioner yet, but if people like us have that same occurrence. So then cessations, I'm talking about, I don't want to go into my personal history of how my cessation developed, but the universal nature of cessations, or cessations like members of our Sangha have them and experience them through our practices, which is very cessation conducive. It's like it's made for cessation. But I was actually making comments about this to a Zen and Theravada teacher, this American fellow, who about the nature of cessations, because the, the definition of cessation varies. So in Theravada, they have, you can look it up if you want, but they have the meaning of cessation is that your mind goes completely blank and you remain in a state of, I would say the word blankness is very descriptive, the way how they say it is. But the mind goes blank and it is completely blank. There is no perception of subject and object, no thoughts, no content. You're just in a state of very strong blankness that has very strong energy and strong clarity. And then you come out of it. So I might, well, I've heard two different versions of this from Theravada Hinayana. Some say that you cannot make it permanent. Some say that it can be made permanent. But I think the prevalent notion is that you go in it and you come out of it, that you can't stay in it. So from the Mahayana point of view, the cessation of, or Nirodha of, or Nirvana of Theravadins, Hinayanis, is called so-called abiding, what is it? Abiding cessation, abiding Nirvana. So they abide in Nirvana as a state. It starts and it stops and they come out of it. In Mahayana, it's non-abiding Nirvana. So Nirvana or cessation is not a state. It is understood that it's not a state, like state of concentration, state of trance, state of jhana are states. It is understood that it is the ground of being, ground of thinking, ground of feeling, ground of activity, ground of everything. And that's why when you dissolve, when your selfing mechanism dissolves into that ground, you are not abiding in that nirvanic state, but you are free from abiding anywhere. That's why non-abiding nirvana. So this is like a Mahayana terminological definition. So how does it feel like? What's the experience like? I mentioned Daniel Ingram earlier on this retreat and his lovely book, Mastering the Core Teachings of Buddha. I mentioned his book in relation to path maps, which he has many of them collected and a little bit analyzed, and well analyzed, some of them. And he also speaks of cessation, and I remember him saying that it's something like a mother of all meditative experiences, in a bit funny way, like he uses this, he's a funny, humorous fellow. There should be more humor in Dharma. One of my favorite musical artists and composers when I was a teenager and musician was Frank Zappa, and he had an album or a song or both, Does Humor Belong in Music? And I often think, does humor belong in Dharma? I'm not asking myself, when I'm thinking about it, I'm feeling strongly that humor should be there in Dharma. But the thing is that some people don't take teachers seriously if they make jokes. And if teachers make jokes like I have, people don't want to, they misinterpret jokes. So there is a pitfall, instant pitfall there. But anyway, Ingram said something like that cessation is the mother of all meditative experiences, and it is, because what it means is that the whole selfing mechanism dissolves into that ground of being. Momentarily dissolves or disappears, and there is only this awakened state. Buddha nature, basic nature, purity of one's own natural original being. And so I remember when I was a kid, I had this, like a being hit like a lightning. And I remember when I had my first Bhumi opening, my first awakening experience 12 years ago, that cessation lasted for an hour and a half. I remember that very clearly. I had amazing time for a year and 3 months after my first Bhumi opening. I had been meditating so much that in traditional language it is spoken of dry awakening or dry insight and wet awakening or wet insight. which means that if you practice lots of meditation, spiritual practices in whatever form, before you start having awakening experiences, it's kind of like the ground becomes wet. And then when you have a shift, awakening, it's kind of wet awakening. It's richer, it's a fuller experience than if you didn't prepare yourself with meditation or other practices. So in my case, my first Bhumi opening awakening was very wet, because this lovely, peaceful, blissful state lasted for 1 year and 3 months before the second pop. I remember a friend from UK who used to come to our retreats. He had been practicing Goenka meditation and some other sutra, shamatha vipassana meditations for 20 years. And then he came to our retreats and practiced two-part formula and had his first awakening experience. And I remember meeting him several times during the next year and a half, and he was always like always like a Buddha. He was so clear-minded, so blissful, so joyful, so happy, and he only had one Bhumi opening. That's because of the wetting of the ground, preparing his body-mind so much before his first shift. And then to touch also a little bit about dry insight, dry awakening. We have many such people in our Sangha, and there has been many people like that in guidances of awakening, guidances to awakening that I've given over the years. I've given over 150 of them. And there was many people who hadn't meditated before, but somehow clicked, felt intuitively that this is something important and wanted to start the process and awaken. And in their case, it varies a little bit. It varies how one's personality is. It also affects what one's life conditions are. I remember this one guy, about 40 years old, who had just separated from his wife and children, had gone bankrupt, and had started having serious health issues. And then, he asked me that, can we do this guidance? And I told him that, may not be the best time, but if you want to do it, we will do it. And he said that, I definitely want to do it. And we dialogued for a few days. He practiced the two-part formula and had the shift. And he wasn't burdened about all the difficulties in life at all. It seemed like it really propelled his practice. And he had a really, really wonderful, a bit wet awakening. I think, if I remember correctly, he had practiced some healing modalities and Reiki and some New Age meditations, perhaps mindfulness before that. So it was a bit wet, and he felt wonderful afterwards. But whether it's dry or wet, what is the same in all Bhumi events, openings, perfections, is the cessation that results in a permanent change in the system. So whether it lasts 2 seconds or hour and a half or days, cessation is the same. The selfing stops existing for a while. It doesn't only bypass to periphery, but it stops existing, but then it comes back, whether it's 2 seconds or hours or days. And I'm trying to remind me of the question, what I'm trying to answer now second time. And I remember that I felt for a lengthy period that when I had cessations, as I was progressing myself through the Bhumi opening stage and then Bhumi perfection stage. But in the Bhumi opening stage, that feeling of being struck by a lightning, it started changing. It didn't feel as dramatic anymore, like oh! Well, that was a bit over dramatic what I had as a child, but when I was a child, it was like, shock. But then it became less dramatic in that sense, but it still did have significant impact, that permanent change. And that's how you know that when you notice that, okay, things are different, things are clearly different now. Doesn't mean in a dramatic way, but subtly different. You just don't feel the same as you did yesterday or before the cessation. Things are different. Your mind is different. You feel a bit different. So something has changed. So I've been talking about the 13 Bhumi model on this retreat. And something that I came to think about is Zen Master Hakuin. Zen Master Hakuin was a Japanese Zen monk who lived a few hundred years ago, maybe 400-500 years ago. And he is regarded as the most important Japanese Zen master of the past 500 years. He had many Dharma heirs and he revitalized the especially Rinzai Zen tradition that I belong to and Terayama Roshi belonged to. He revitalized that tradition. And that's why, because of his role and revitalization, all Rinzai Zen lineages existing today have come through Hakuin. So very significant master. And Hakuin, in his writings that you can find plenty available in English, he spoke about, oh gosh, I always have trouble remembering the numbers, right? But he spoke of having I might remember completely wrong, but roughly he said something like, I have had 20 major awakenings and then 50 or something small awakenings. Personally myself, I had, with Bhumi purification, I had 13 major awakenings, but also maybe a dozen small ones that don't count as didn't open the next Bhumi. So I had, like, for example, opening of 6th, and before the 7th opened, I had a small shift inside the 6th, so that the 7th didn't yet open. And still I noticed that there was a small effect this cessation had. Okay, so in Hakuin's case, you can find the quote easily if you just Google it. But he spoke in a similar manner. He spoke of major kenshos, major awakening experiences, and then many smaller ones. I remember there's another Zen master, there's a video clip on our YouTube channel of Yamada Ryon Roshi, he's still alive, where he speaks of comparing consecutive awakenings and first awakening and consecutive awakenings to making a hole into a wall. He actually speaks of Berlin Wall because he went to Berlin when the wall was still up. And he says that without awakening, it's like watching a wall. You can't see to the other side of it, so you don't know how it is on the other side of the wall. But when you have the first Kensho, first awakening, it's like drilling a small hole into the wall, and then you can, there's a small hole, so you can see a little bit on the other side. and you can take time and observe what it is like on the other side. Suddenly it's available for you. You no longer have to guess, you no longer have to rely on second-hand information. The whole is there, and even though it's small, it is a whole. And then he describes in that video clip that with consecutive awakenings, that whole just keeps getting bigger. And finally, the whole wall is gone. That's a perfect analogy. I have shared it in Facebook many times over the years when I found it very clear description how it goes, and it goes like that. So in my experience, the drama or the dramaticity, is that a word, became less as the Bhumi opening phase, as I went through it. And it happens so many times, and the duration of the cessation extends, so you get to know it, you learn about it, so it stops being a mystery. At some point you just know that, okay, another awakening, another Bhumi event, lovely. And as the duration increases, then you also really get to feel how it is like to be in this awakened state. How is it like to be a Buddha that the whole tradition is about? Which is the reason why all traditions started, the original reason. Why? Right? So you get a feel of that. And of course, when you get a first-hand feel of that, you automatically start remembering stuff you read from books, and you can verify through your own experience, oh, that bit of information was correct, but that other bit was not. And this is very important. Remember Babaji's advice, be yourself, find your own way, find your own way, actualize the path yourself. So this is very important, and I must say that I had those moments myself when I verified some bits I had heard and read and falsified lots, because it just wasn't true in my experience, wasn't correct. So suddenly finding ourselves that, we feel when we are working with our energy body, with our aura, with mantras and so on, we get to know how our subtle body feels like. We get to know how the subtle body feels like when we are in selfless mode, when we are in the recognition of our pure nature, and we get to know how it feels like when it is in self-based mode, whether mildly self-based, like in a peaceful samsaric mode, or in chaotic samsaric mode, strong emotions, anger, whatnot. So we get to know, we learn the feel of it. We know how it feels in these two modes. And one thing that of course happens, because cessation is stopping of that whole mechanism, is that you suddenly don't have it anymore. You don't have any of it for a moment. And like I said, you get to know as you have that experience in common term. When you have that experience many times, then you know that, okay, this is cessation. This is not only the mind becoming quiet or your selfing stuff, selfing energy going to the periphery, but it's completely gone. So you learn this firsthand. dynamic concentration practice and the way how we practice Tantra, absorbing blessings of gurus and absorbing deities is perfect formula for this because it makes that hole. You know, when you shout mantras, you punch through your samsaric energy system and it creates a hole. It creates a space where there is no selfing at all. So this technique it's really precious because it gives these cessations again and again and again. The durations, like I've mentioned several times, the durations increase and finally it's only cessation. And it's not blank like the view in Theravada, but you have thoughts, you have emotions, but there is no self in there. There is no sense of me, I in there. I could add from meridian cessations maybe just a little remark about that the mechanism is the same. Durations of those increase little by little. But I felt specifically with meridians that I thought about this question last night when I was going to bed and came up with this analogy. Think that you have a wetsuit on. Wetsuit like divers use. And I have actually never worn a wetsuit, but I assume it could be like this. So, you know, the suit is wet and you feel that it's wet. You might think, for the sake of analogy, that the suit is a bit too tight or a bit too loose, but not perfect. You might think that there is something extra, something wrong with the suit, so it doesn't really feel natural. Okay? Traumas in the system, echoes of selfing in the system. That's what's off. But then, when cessations, meridian system ceases, it's as if the wetsuit is shed off, like it just peels off from you suddenly. And it peels off it can peel off very slowly. I've had it peel from upper parts of my body slowly through the system, all the way through the body, peeling the wetsuit, and suddenly you are in pure light body. Or the peeling can happen just like when you peel an onion, suddenly the peel just drops off, and then you are in light body. So I wanted to add that point about that the sensation of peeling, like peeling off of wetsuit or peeling off of dirty clothes or peeling off of the meridian system, and only the original purity of it remains. Do you have any questions about this? Please ask now, because I will never speak about this again. All right, well, I hope it was clear enough. Now that we're talking about light body, we've had a conversation about bodhicitta, and sometimes practitioners having difficulty in feeling genuine bodhicitta. So I thought of doing a little bit of bodhisattva bodhicitta workshop. So let's continue with that.